Taylor Swift will be the one to propose to Travis Kelce in a real victory for feminism. And I would expect many Budweiser ads, and they're all going to have like horses and patriotic images and lots of small town America.
Okay, so welcome to episode 105 of Farming Markets. This is a show where our participants only get 5 minutes to state their opinion, and the person with the most time at the end wins, but there are no prizes. Today we are talking about Jerome Powell's 60 Minutes interview, the blowout jobs report, Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin in Russia, surviving the apocalypse, and the Super Bowl. So Jerome Powell appeared on 60 Minutes on Sunday night. It was about a 13-minute interview. Did you hear him say anything worth listening to?
I thought there. I mean, nothing he said. He said without wanting people to know it. So I think everything he had to say was at least interesting. The two things that I think were most interesting to me was that it sounds like they're getting a little bit soft on that definitive 2% CPI number. Saying that they may start raising rates before they get there, which I'm not sure if that means they don't think it's actually going to get to 2%, or if they're just going to start lowering rates before and hope for the best. I'm not sure on that, but I think most people are thinking that when they start cutting rates, inflation might start going back up again. So the question I have is really how hard and fast is that 2%? The second one is I think they are actually laying the groundwork for potentially leaving rates where they are longer than originally the market was hoping. It's now sounding like they don't want to do anything until May or later. So if the January numbers here that we're going to get next week for CPI show inflation is staying in the 3.5% range, what does that mean when he says he wants to see more good data, quote unquote, before they start cutting rates? What if the March number for February is no different? So those two things have me very interested in what are they going to do with rates, and how serious really are they in getting inflation down to 2.0% in the immediate future?
I don't think he said anything particularly illuminating. He chose his words carefully. Like Alex said, he knew what he was saying. It was a lot more palatable than watching the Fed market open committee meeting minutes or reading about it in the Wall Street journals. It was kind of cool to see him just sitting there in the in the chair for 60 Minutes interview. Basically said the same stuff that I was expecting to hear him say. The Fed is they have a cautious approach towards cutting interest rates. He did emphasize that there needs to be more evidence that inflation is sustainably moving towards that 2% target before they do cut rates. So he did say again that they probably won't be cutting rates as soon as what the rest of the world thought based on the last couple meetings. Said that the economy is strong, which, I don't know if I fully agree with. He did address some of the national debt concerns, which I did agree with. There's a long-term sustainability issue for the United States, and I kind of like that it was going against what politicians might have him say, that we do have a national debt crisis and it's not sustainable. Other than that, it was pretty much just regurgitating stuff that he already says during his FOMC minutes.
But Powell was a very accomplished interviewee. He did a very good job handling the interview, and certainly spoke well. I don't think there was anything really riveting in anything he said. It was made me chuckle a little bit. I remember when Alan Greenspan was being patted on the back and celebrated for doing a wonderful job of the soft landing in the 1990s, only to have the economy implode in 2000, 2001, and 2002. So I take a lot of the things that these Federal Reserve chairmen and governors say with a grain of salt, is because quite frankly, I've experienced the back patting in the past, which turned out to be a harbinger of bad things in the future.
He talks to the public the same way I talk to my children. is that Alice and I have learned that when there's something that the kids are really going to like doing, we don't tell them if we're going to do it or not. And sometimes we don't even tell them, we don't even tell them about the event. But when we do, we're like, look, we might go to the parade this weekend. They're like, so we're going to go, right? I'm like, maybe. They're like, well, how do you know if we're going to go? I'm like, well, we'll have to look at the weather. And they're like, well, what time are we going to go? I'm like, I don't know. It depends. And so I keep doing this to them because, number one, I don't know. And number two, I don't want to deal with the disappointment if we don't go. And it's the exact same thing. The two things out of Jerome Powell's mouth are, number one, when are you going to cut rates? I don't know. Or are you going to cut rates? Maybe. And what's the criteria that you're going to use to cut those rates? They're like, well, we'll look at the data. And those are the two answers that the Federal Reserve gives that are the exact two answers that I would give my children if I was going to tell them that we were going to cut interest rates. I'll look at the data, maybe. But basically what he's saying is that they don't know. They're not sure if they want to do it or not yet. They're not ready to, but they don't want to get everybody's hopes up and be disappointed. I was surprised at the end of the interview. He was like, he said that the U.S. needed to get a handle on its debt. And sometimes I got to pinch myself because the DMV got my license plates to me like in record time. I called them, they answered the phone, and like got all my issues worked out in 5 minutes. And now Jerome Powell's telling me the U.S. needs to get their debt under control. It's like sometimes I have to pinch myself. But yeah, those are my takeaways from the 60 Minutes interview. Let's see here. So talking about economic data, the latest jobs reports like completely blew the doors off the estimates, like tens of thousands of jobs more than were actually anticipated. Meanwhile, like so we're having more jobs and inflation is cooling. What's this telling us, do you think, Alex?
So first of all, a lot of people keep saying, and I keep hearing that inflation is cooling. It's not really. It's definitely come down from the peak, but since the May data of last year, it's been in the 3 to 3.7% range. So it's kind of actually flatlined. It's not really declining much anymore. It's just kind of bumping up and down a little bit in each direction. And I think everybody wants to see it go back down at least below 3. But beyond that, if we look at the unemployment data pre-COVID, it was actually a little bit better than it is today. It was 3.5% right before everything was blown up by COVID. It's now 3.7%. We've pretty much seen most of these jobs just recovering back to their pre-COVID levels. That's number one. Second, we've seen a lot of manufacturing job growth that has kind of caught some people by surprise. Doesn't come as that big a surprise to me, though, and for two reasons. Number one, you have the CHIPS Act. You have a lot more incentive through subsidies to build microprocessor plants here in the United States. Those are all manufacturing jobs. You should expect to see more microprocessor plants being built in the United States because there's financial incentive to do so. The other thing is the renegotiated NAFTA, USMCA. It's kind of a big win for North American manufacturers, and that means American manufacturers. So you should probably expect to see some more reshoring of manufacturing jobs in general. A third thing, though, is I saw some interesting data recently that I think 2023, the rough estimate is that about 400,000 people, more people left the labor market in the United States than entered it for that calendar year. And that number is expected to peak at about 900,000 in the mid-2030s. That's largely because baby boomers are retiring and there's actually fewer younger people replacing them entering the job market. So you should expect to continue seeing, barring, massive numbers of immigrants of all, skill levels, you should continue to expect to see a pretty tight labor market because we're seeing more people retiring than are entering the labor force. So I think at least on the employment data, that's what's going on. And like I said before, I want to see the next few months of CPI data before I'm willing to say that inflation is cool.
On paper, this looks pretty good. And I feel like I might be the pessimist on today's episode, but overall, good numbers are better than bad numbers. But I'm smelling the cabbage a bit on this one. I think the data on paper is is a bit more from federal cash infusions and less of a result of economic strengthening. It's kind of like when the federal minimum wage goes up and a lot of people cheer because it looks great on paper, but the devil's in the details. And if you look at the historical data, the lowest tier of earners actually experience negative financial outcomes due to reduced working hours or replacement. And that might be a little of what's reflected in this data with the jobs growth. Now, despite the impressive increase in payrolls, the average number of hours worked per week has actually gone down. It went from 34.6 hours in January to 34.1 hours this year, reaching its lowest point since the lowest point of COVID in March 2020. So even though there's more jobs having been created, these jobs might include fewer full-time jobs, or they might reflect a reduction in hours worked, painting a less rosy picture of the market's actual strength. Another interesting aspect of this is that the rapid job growth, it's happening now in the midst of low unemployment. Typically, when the unemployment rate is low, it indicates that most people who want a job have a job. And job growth slows down because there's fewer unemployed people hunting for jobs. However, the large job growth creation this year kind of contradicts that behavior. And one theory might be that the economy has been temporarily boosted by having the government run a large budget deficit, including like massive spending on the CHIPS Act, like Alex alluded to, the infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reductions Act. So whenever there's economic data boosted by the efforts of deficit spending, I'm not one to immediately cheer.
We talk about inflation coming down, and we talk about people coming back into the workforce. Well, sometimes if you have a bunch of people sitting at home enjoying their pandemic subsidy checks, and then the subsidy checks end, and the price of everything around them has gone up 30 to 40%, sometimes they're inspired to get off the couch and go find a job. And now they're having to pay back a lot of the credit cards for that window when they stop getting subsidy checks, but they kind of continue to live the same lifestyle, and now have gotten a job. So they're not spending as much because after the pandemic, a lot of the supply chains are starting to meet the demand. So prices are not necessarily coming down. They're just not going up as rapidly. And then finally, we're getting right smack dab in the middle of an election cycle. And we can expect that the mainstream media is going to do everything they possibly can to make the Biden administration look wonderful. So they're going to be saying all kinds of rosy things about how great the economy is. But as Drew said, there's a lot of devil in the details, which unless you do digging, you're not going to find in the mainstream media.
It's the jobs report is actually horribly complicated. Like, and there's at least 3 revisions to each jobs report. So, and then also the Department of Labor like updates like how they get their census information in January, which messes everything up because they don't adjust the previously collected data for the new census information. So it makes it complicated. So when they're like, oh, we get like a huge jobs number, I don't know how much weight I'd put behind that. If I was going to like venture a theory other than the fact it's complicated and it's probably not as good as it looks, I would say that people are not that afraid of what the next 12 months is going to, at least employers are not afraid of what the next 12 months will look like, because you're already, interest rates have already been hiked. And according to the Fed, was that we're just going to cut them. The presidential election is like 2 people that have already been in office. So you kind of have some idea of what it might look like if either one of them gets elected, assuming like Nikki Haley doesn't get elected. So going forward, if you look at 12 months or 24 months, yeah, the big news is interest rates, but it's not necessarily like this huge uncertainty like it was in the last election year, or or like it was before we hiked rates, because at that point nobody knew what was going to happen if we bumped interest rates all the way up. So I think that the worst case scenarios for most people, I don't think employers are that worried and are willing to like bring on employees when interest rates and stuff are that high. So I think that might be a theory as to why the jobs numbers were higher than expected. But also the job report, like the the method used for doing that is actually highly complicated, and there's usually revisions that can adjust that by tens of thousands of jobs too. So I don't know if it means that much. Let's see here. So apparently Tucker Carlson is said to be currently in Russia and is going to supposedly interview Vladimir Putin. And he's been the first U.S. Journalist and part of the U.S. media that's been granted access to Russia since the country invaded Ukraine back in 2022. What do you think of Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin? Do you think he's betraying America? I mean, do you think it's, is he just looking out for himself? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, usually when you have something like this, they used to call it journalism and not treason. But so I guess that might have something to say about the state of the media in general. But in all seriousness, I would take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, Putin's not going to say anything. The Russians are not going to want anything out there that's going to paint them in a negative light. So I can't imagine it's going to be a particularly antagonistic interview. On the other hand, I also don't think it's a bad thing to get an opposing perspective. You don't have to necessarily like Putin or think the Russians are the good guys or anything like that to understand maybe where they're coming from with what they're doing in Ukraine or what their concerns about are in Eastern Europe. So I don't think it's bad to get an opposing view, but like I said, take it with a grain of salt. It's probably going to be a propaganda piece.
Yeah, I don't really have too many opinions now, but before seeing the interview, I can't really say one way or another, but after the interview, I'm sure I'll have more opinions. I think it's overall, it's a good thing. Like Alex said, it gives access to alternate perspectives, alternative perspectives. Putin could express his views directly to an American audience, could offer some insights on his motivations and what reasons why he invaded Ukraine, things like that. I think the public has a right to the information. I don't think we should silence any interview viewers or interviewees. They should understand all aspects of the conflict that we find ourselves involved in. It's kind of a cool journalistic opportunity. This is the first American journalist to do an interview with Putin in some time. Now there's going to be some backlash against this for sure. Like Alex said, it could be an opportunity to spread Russian propaganda. I don't know, there's some reputational risks with Tucker Carlson and the United States. But overall, I think it's good that they're doing the interview, and I guess maybe we'll have more to say after he actually does the interview.
Tucker Carlson is a disruptor in the mainstream media, but what he's doing is analogous to what the mainstream media did when they interviewed the likes of Daniel Ortega or Hugo Chavez with the same predictive backlash from the conservative camp. This is not a situation where Tucker Carlson is really taking sides where he goes, I'm kind of pro-Russia, and that's why I want to do the interview. And he's not necessarily anti-Ukraine. You got to remember what his motivations are, is that Tucker Carlson comes from the Patrick Buchanan camp of being an isolationist. And to a certain degree, Donald Trump was somewhat of an isolationist as well. So was George Washington, in his farewell speech when he told the American public that we ought to avoid getting ourselves entangled in foreign affairs. So when we hear about this story, I think we have to kind of understand the motivations here, is that Tucker Carlson is going to sell us on the idea that the United States should not be involved in every international foray, and is trying to minimize the American footprint in terms of foreign policy overseas.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the person who's mad at you why they're mad at you or why they're mad at Ukraine. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Getting their side of the story. Like, yeah, Alex said it perfectly. It's journalism. It's not treason. But yeah, I mean, just ask him, like, get his side of like what's going on. But I don't know. Joe's better at feelings than I am, so I mean, you probably said it better. So, all right, let's see here. So another study from a studyfinds.com found that 1 in 3 Americans think that they will be the last one standing if the apocalypse were to happen. Alex, are you going to be the 1 in 3 person that's going to survive the apocalypse?
Well, if it's a nuclear apocalypse, I will survive the initial explosions, but not survive to the point where we get to the Mad Max wasteland. So somewhere in between is where I'm checking out.
Absolutely. I'm going to survive any apocalypse. And I'm not saying that because I have a lot of pride or confidence, something like that. But I think you have to adopt a positive mental attitude. If there is a apocalypse coming, you don't want to be like, yeah, I'm one of the people that's just going to, curl up in a ball and die. I feel like if you have the best chance, you need to tell yourself that you're going to survive.
I'm pretty confident I'm going to survive the apocalypse. That's why I live in rural Montana, off 4 miles up a dirt road, where I don't think I'm a target. I think that if they're going to be hitting the areas where the vast majority of people live, as opposed to the sparsely populated areas which I have chosen to live.
Yeah, my one criticism with you, Joe, is that you've told everybody how good you are at surviving the apocalypse and what you've done and where you live. For me, is that like I don't tell anybody about my survival skills. I live in the city of Whitefish, so it's a complete enigma whether I'm going to survive or not. Whereas like you're probably going to have a line outside your property, and me, they'll probably leave me alone. So I'd say that my chances, I don't know, they could be 50-50. So just I'm not going to advertise it. So
the best way to win friends and influence people is to feed them.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
We probably won't lose power unless they hit the dam. So all of us will probably be pretty good for a while.
All right. So I think just from that, Alex is anticipating a nuclear apocalypse. So I don't know what other kind there would be. I mean, who knows? Like,
Yeah.
So I don't know. All right. Last question is the Super Bowl's this weekend. I know most people here don't follow sports, but I think what is it? Is it Baltimore and the Chiefs in Kansas City?
49ers Chiefs.
Oh, the 49ers are the Chiefs. Good. Glad I know what I'm talking about here. But who you got? Like, who's your team? Do you have a team? Do you care?
So real fast, I don't have a particular rooting interest this year, but I'll give you 4 predictions. Number 1, Chiefs will win 31-20 over the 49ers. Mahomes will be Super Bowl MVP. Taylor Swift will be the one to propose to Travis Kelce in a real victory for feminism. And I would expect many Budweiser ads, and they're all going to have like horses and patriotic images and lots of small town America. Those are my predictions.
I'm going to go with Alex's predictions. Those sound great. So
can you give me the scores again?
Yeah.
31-20 Chiefs over Niners.
Alex has stole all of any thunder I would have had.
Yeah, that was pretty good. My prediction was that Taylor Swift was going to win the Super Bowl, was going to be the hands down winner. So yeah, that's it. So
hold on a sec. How is Taylor Swift implicated in the Super Bowl?
She's reading a newspaper.
Oh, geez. Where have you been, man?
I don't one of the star players for the Chiefs.
Important things.
You're so out of touch, Drew.
Sorry, I'm not. Yeah.
I didn't even know that the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl. But I didn't know that Taylor Swift was.
Oh, it's nice to know that you spend your time reading about those kind of things.
I'm retired.
Yeah, he's retired now. He spends his time reading about Taylor Swift. He probably had to turn. That was probably on his Spotify before he logged on to the call today. So. All right, that's it for episode 105. We'll see you again next week.